Welcome to Success Authorities Conversation Street with Leadership Authority Peter Beaumont and with Business Culture Authority Ronn Lehmann and me, Linda Ruhland, Success Authorities founder.
I focus on helping, I like to call them accidental CEOs. It's these tech B2B founders that are really, really good at this thing they do, and they have a successful business because of that expertise. But then they get themselves into a place where, oh my gosh, I don't know how to do this marketing thing, and they don't have anybody to help them with that. So they're kind of lost and drifting. And I focus on, I like to say marketing engines for these CEOs. And the focus is, what's the right marketing for you? Kind of blank slate view of marketing and helping them figure that out. And then for some, helping them put that engine together. My latest kind of twist or expansion of that is I'm realizing so many of them, they need help with marketing, but then there's a so that I tend to minimize, which is so that I can exit in 3 years, so that we're big enough that I can this or that. So they do have a destination in mind. And so I'm starting to look at, I have my engine building offer, but then I have what I call my finish line offer to say, how do we, now that we built that engine, how do we take you and your business to where you want to go with it? And so that's a little bit more, it's not a little bit more, it's a lot more than just marketing, right? It's getting more into the world you guys live in about what are the challenges to being a CEO that, marketing's tentacles are in it because of the way I view marketing, but it's beyond just marketing. It's team and leadership, things like that.
Cool. Well, that is your book, which
There it is.
I'm a proud owner of, and it's he says, opening it.
You have a signed copy. Those are priceless.
I know. Yes. Well, you're not getting it back. So because it's got my name on it. So but we've got some questions for you around that, obviously, Pete. But as I've said to you, I think before as we were leading up to this, and the other two know, we often go down what we call squirrel holes fairly rapidly. So and you'll probably notice that fairly quickly, but it ends up being a very good conversation. So yeah,
I'm happy wherever it goes. It'll be a great conversation.
Feel free to find your own squirrel holes too, Pete.
Thank you. Birds of a feather. We have a lot
Equal opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I'll keep that in mind.
So let me try and kick it off, Pete, because I have read the book and I thought you did a great job on it. It's written specifically for the target you just outlined, and it talks about the importance of marketing with meaning. So how do you define purpose-driven marketing, and why do you think that's so crucial for CEOs of small business today?
The way I like to frame that, Peter, is my definition of marketing is pretty simple, and it's marketing creates and strengthens relationships between you and your customer. And everything we do is related to building those relationships. And when I think about those relationships, what I realized is relationships don't happen if there's not a reason. There's not a meaning behind it. So I'll just use a simple example of if I'm at the grocery store, I'm at Cup Foods, and I walk by the end aisle and there's a box of cereal on sale. That's the one I like. That's an impulse purchase, but there's a reason. I like that brand and it's on sale. That same dynamic scales to a $100,000 B2B services contract. If my offer doesn't speak to the needs, the priorities, and the meaning, what's important to that busy person that is on the other end, they're not going to spend time on it. We all know the noise, right? And the overload and the number of emails that don't get opened and all of that. I believe that the solution is meaning, because if you can start with that and they realize I can help, the conversation, the investment in time with me or my company can help them achieve what they're trying to achieve, that's how that attraction happens. Versus let me tell you about my company. Let me tell you about what we do. Let me tell you about our product. That's not meaningful to them. And so you don't bridge the gap.
Yeah, good. Yeah, so one of the things, funny enough, we've been dealing with at SEGC recently is, as you know, is Don Miller's latest book, which is, well, it's not his latest, but latest but one, How to Grow Your Small Business. And of course, he uses his story brand approach in that, which, so the end aisle thing, I like the way you used the example. The end aisle thing is one thing, but and then it's connecting, right, to the need, as you said, or the problem that product solves for the consumer. And I think that so many companies lead with what they can do for you rather than identifying what the problem is in the first place, right?
Yes.
And
one of my favorite maxims is it's not about you.
Yeah.
You really gotta think, yes, customer first. Everybody hears that it really is true. It has to be about them.
Yeah, it's not about, I just wrote that too. It's not about you. And yet, God, I always thought it was. I know that doesn't surprise you, Ron. For a minute, I saw you giggle immediately.
No, I just had a tickle in my throat.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So one of the things that Ron works on a lot is culture, and that's really one of his sweet spots, and something we draw on a lot in Success Authorities. And one of the things you talk about in the book is aligning core values. You align marketing strategies with core values, and I don't think I've heard that discussed so well before. So, what steps do you think CEOs should take to ensure that alignment? And it's easy to align sometimes, but is it actually authentic and effective? So, what do you advise to make sure that connection happens in that way?
Well, first, let me start with just the context. Another maxim for me is simplicity. Less is more. And it's just so, it's not just about design. It's in everything we do, right? Focus and intention on doing less and doing it better. It relates here to the fact that this meaningful marketing, it's not something you create in addition to your values and your culture. It's externalizing your mission. It's the same thing. So the last thing you want to do is have a culture and a mission and then set that over to the side and then say, okay, now what's our marketing story? It needs to be just another chapter or another, edition of your core mission. Because that meaning comes from you offering something that is an output, is a fruit of your purpose for having your company. And rather than, okay, we've got this thing we want to do. Now, how can we schlep it, right? What do we say about it? That's wrong because it's inauthentic, but it's also wrong because you've added another thing you have to manage. And okay, now what was I supposed to say about this? Versus you don't need to give me a script really because I'm living this, right? And it's just the right words to express it for that audience.
I think my experience as a consumer is sometimes the opposite is true, that the marketing displays values that are fabulous, and the organization does not operate with those values at all. And consumers figure that out pretty quickly.
They do.
And does that resonate with your experience as well, Pete?
Absolutely. And I think that's that authenticity. On the one hand, it's easy to be authentic with your marketing if you have a really strong brand. I mean, a strong culture. The lipstick on a pig method is common, right? Oh, I've got this company. Oh my gosh, they're messed up. They're dysfunctional, or they're just vacuous, right? They're just not. They're doing things for surface reasons. And then if the marketers come in and say, we can fix this up, we're going to make this sound awesome. Great for the first sale. But especially in B2B, when it's not transactional, when the service is as important as the platform or the technology, And when the people get involved and when months go by and you see the real culture, that dissonance gets in the way, right? So then you don't have retention, you don't continue.
Yeah.
So it's companies, I believe, that are successful are the ones that have that strong culture, and then there's transparency between the culture and the marketing.
Yeah. I will not remember who said it, but somebody said if culture is your competitive advantage, culture is how you compete. And it's
Absolutely.
got to be part of everything, integrated throughout. And as you said, and I think the successful companies do that, sometimes by accident and sometimes intentionally. But I think when I do culture audits, I'll go into a company. What I'm looking for is what's the operational culture, the one that really is operating and helps people make decisions versus the desired or stated culture.
Yeah.
Um, and what I often find is thermal layers. So building off your example, so let's say the company, has really strong values and the marketing reflects those values beautifully. And so there is a thermal layer between how it's sold and how it's supported and how it's serviced. So everything was great. I get the product and then I need to get some support and it's a different the values aren't as all those values that were built in at two ends are not in the middle. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
And
so
I
you're
think
saying
I've
that
experienced that.
the what I hear you saying is from the cultural side of this story, the leadership side, if you're not doing the hard work of instilling the culture in your whole company, then it will come back and bite you because they'll get to the parts that haven't absorbed it and there's like, what? That's not right.
As customers, unless you have a lot of brand loyalty, I'm not going to give you a second chance.
Right.
Whereas if you've built brand loyalty, I'm going to say, okay, I had a bad experience, but overall, that might have been a one-off. But if it isn't, then it's like, well, now I question everything. So this is a really long-winded way of saying I really agree with what you're talking about. I
You
guess
know,
I could have just said that, but
what you just said, Ron, it made me think of something. We talk in marketing a lot about repetition and the power of saying the same thing to the point where it's boring to the company, but that's when it actually gets traction, right? When that's why you have impressions, that's why you have billboards, all those things. It's like hitting them over and over and over again is a way to get through. When you call customer service, when you talk to the salesperson, when you use the product, those are another example of repetition. The marketing repetition is surface level and it's
Mhm.
controllable by a thoughtful marketing program. The rest of it, you can't fake. It comes from the hard work, right? Which means it's an opportunity because it's harder to do. So not everybody's, it's a way to differentiate yourself.
Yeah. And I think the scary thing for the CEO is what's happening at every touch point every day. Um, and are we showing that coherence of values and are we setting up? And um, you know, a couple years ago I got a new furnace and the way it was sold was fabulous. I was really happy with the sales process. Um, and and then came the installation and it was every bit as good. And then came a problem with something that had nothing to do with them, but it was the same company and they also did plumbing. That's who I called first. Um, and I'm almost positive they weren't the cheapest, but I assumed competence because of
Yeah.
how it went the first time. And even if they were more expensive, I knew that if they said they were going to be there at a certain time, they were going to be. And they were. I mean, it was a consistency of values. And I have a belief which may not be true, but I stick to it, which is the way you do anything is the way you do everything.
Hmm.
And I see things they're sold one way and delivered a different way. And as a consumer, it's just like, well, so now and how that really translates, and this is my bias, now I question everything. When it comes to marketing, I go, are they really going to do
Mhm.
that? Or is this because good marketing is fabulous and the rest is horrific, as you well know. I mean,
Yeah.
good for you because there's lots of stuff that you can be helping with because there's some really awful. awful email marketing that,
Yes.
and of course I read every one because I'm fascinated with how they're written, which is generally poorly. My
Yeah,
favorite is when it starts off with "Dear Mrs. Lehman." That's my favorite. Like you really did your homework on this one, but I'm sure it's AI generated or whatever. But
Right.
I think the other problem you have often is, are the core values really core values, right? So it's difficult to then match the marketing with those if they don't really exist.
you bring up a great point. I think that you can have values, but that doesn't mean they're all core values. Because I mean, I always look at core values as no excuses, no exceptions. These are the 3 or 4 things that we base everything
Right,
on.
right, right.
And whenever I see a list of values, it's like 12 values.
Yeah.
It's like, well, if you value everything, then
Value nothing, right? Yeah.
but I think it's fine to have 12 things that you like to focus on, but when you get at the core,
Well,
um,
typically on EOS, you do 4 or 5, no more than that.
yeah, it's first of all, it's people won't remember 12.
Correct.
And that's what you want to do is get people both inside and outside to know these are the 3 or 4 or 5 things that they stand for.
Yeah, that's something Don Miller says, that people rarely remember more than 3. So
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah.
three of that, three.
Yeah.
This is why
Although,
speakers do effective. They link 3 things. This is the purpose of this is that, right?
yeah,
So
the rule of 3.
yeah.
Absolutely.
And that's why, well, I had a CEO once who had 3 things. He said, these are the 3 things that I believe in. I pound these all the time. I mean, this is all I ever talk about. And when I did the cultural audit, I I reported back to him that the only people that could name his 3 core values were his direct reports.
Mm.
And he was flabbergasted. He said, I taught it constantly. I said, well, I don't know what to tell you, but when I ask people, what are the 3 S's? He says, what? I don't know. Well, it's, his values, the key core values to talk about. Uh, so they started guessing. Um, but he was very concerned and he really redoubled his efforts to not just talk about it with his core or his key reports, but everybody. And then he also told his key reports, you got to talk about this too with your people, and they'll filter it down to the projects. And but he was surprised
Got
that
to take, you got to take copies of that tablet and hand them out.
yeah, you can't just come down from the mountaintop. You got to make some
Exactly.
copies, make some
You know,
copies.
Exactly. Yeah.
the marketing parallel to that is when I talk about company's true story, it's kind of like that's the external, that's that thing I was talking about, right? Their vision, their mission, their purpose. A fun exercise is to ask the CEO early in the engagement, just go and ask half a dozen people randomly in your company or more if you want, why are we here? What's our purpose? And almost always they tend to assume, of course they know what I'm thinking, because that's what I believe. I think it every day, but they're
Yeah.
not spreading it, right? And in the
Mhm.
marketing side, it's an added impact, because if you don't have that alignment, every touch point then is getting a different perspective on the value of the business, why we're here, who we help, all those things. Whereas if you get everybody on that same page, it creates that consistent experience we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, and they can all make the link between the purpose, the mission, the values, and what they do on a
Their
daily
behavior.
basis. Do you find that some have really clear ideas of what their values are, and others have an idea of what they think they are, what they would like to have? And do you have others who have never thought about it?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ron. I think part of the answer to that is the people we help tend to have a gap that we can help them with. And for whatever, I haven't totally made this connection as to why, but the people that I tend to be able to help the most have a real strong importance of culture. The people are really important to them.
Mhm.
So it may be different than the ones you end up helping, because you obviously can help them with that. But I find that the ones that, and I think it relates to their understanding of the value of making the marketing work, comes from them getting that this is more than a a transactional thing for their employees. This is meaningful, right? He wants
Yeah.
there's a legacy there. And so for me, it does tend to be there. They just haven't connected it to the marketing.
Yeah. Well, and that's exactly my experience too.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Conversation Street. For more information or to schedule a private conversation with Success Authorities, email us at inquire@successauthorities.com.